The Great Lakes contain 84% of the fresh surface water in North America. But like drought-stricken areas out west, the lakes are being affected by climate change as extreme changes in water level batter cities and increase pollution. To learn more about what's happening in our own Lake Michigan and what needs to be done in order to mitigate the effects of climate change, we welcome Sharon Waller, an environmental engineer and a member of the Lake View Presbyterian Church in Chicago. Sharon is running for commissioner of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago in the Illinois June primary election. Sharon, thank you so much again for joining us today. One of the questions I have is about all of our rising lake levels in Chicago. Almost everyone who lives in the Chicago area knows about rising lake levels, shrinking beaches, and crumbling seawalls. What's causing this?
There was a great article written in the New York Times by Dan Egan. He works with the Water Center in University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. He's written a book, The Battle of the Great Lakes, but then also this particular article in the New York Times, fascinating that it didn't get picked up by our local media in Chicago, is really informative and has a lot of good science background in it. So we're experiencing extreme weather, so formerly known as climate change, and I guess we can say that again in our current administration. So floods and droughts are predicted to increase, and this also affects the water levels in Lake Michigan. And Dan Egan kind of frames this as a battle between precipitation and evaporation. Precipitation is pretty straightforward. The last 5 years of record have been taken collectively the wettest on record. So that's driving our lake levels higher. And then when you have higher lake levels, the waves don't have an opportunity to dissipate their energy on the run up to a sloped beach. So they're coming and crashing against the shoreline and buildings in some cases with their full impact without having that advantage of decreasing their energy on a sloped beach.
Lake Michigan has risen and fallen over time. So what's different about the current crisis? What makes now different than the past?
Well, it's really the time scales. So the time between low and high is greatly decreased. I grew up on the Lighthouse Beach in Evanston, and then just seeing the time scales between high and low water level, it used to take decades to get from high to low water level. But now we've seen a change in water level of 6 feet just over a period of 7 years. So that's much different, and we kind of expect this to increase. And you can imagine, I think we might talk about this a little later in the interview, the impact on an engineering design.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious about that right now. So how does this kind of quicker time scale impact how we might design things for our communities?
Well, you mean the water levels are actually kind of a bigger issue than maybe even the flood control, I think, just because of the power of those waves. So we have the highest high of record and the lowest low of record happening within the last 15 years. And engineering design is based on, at least for big infrastructure, based on like 30 to 100 year life expectancies for that structure. And so you can imagine that if we use the historic data, which is customary in engineering design, the history, much like our stock market, does not indicate future performance. So if we just design based on the past, we may not make it to accommodating future floods. And this can be seen in the Tunnel and Reservoir Project that started its construction in 1970s when I was a small kid. I grew up on the Deep Tunnel Project, which we affectionately called it. It's part of the Tunnel and Reservoir Project. And it's due to be completed by the decade's end in 2029. And now, after all these decades of constructing, it's not expected to accommodate our floodwaters. So it's going to take a multi-pronged approach, but I think it's also going to take just a different way of thinking and innovation.
So you mentioned flooding. What exactly happens in Chicago when heavy rains cause flooding?
Well, you can sign up for combined sewer overflow alerts through the MWRD website. That sewage flows down to the Illinois River and ultimately the Gulf of Mexico. But when the combined sewer overflows happen in a very swollen river, they risk reversing into our drinking water source, which is Lake Michigan. And this still happens once a year on average. So there is a big component of dilution in the Great Lakes, so I don't want to cause any alarms on that, but I also don't think that there's a single public health professional out there that thinks this is a good idea.
Gotcha. So in your opinion, what do we need to do in order to mitigate at least some of these effects of climate change on the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan in particular?
Well, I think we have to rethink how we do flood control. It's going to take including the residential landowners as well and pushing out tools for them. So such as I installed a stormwater basin under my patio with permeable pavers to try to keep my stormwater on site. And it's not just my stormwater either, because we have an alley that borders our property that's similar to a lot in the city of Chicago, just gets paved, material on top of material. And so the alley slopes into our backyards. So I benefit not only from my own stormwater, but all the water that runs off from the alley in my section of it. And others along my alley have their garages flood, etc. So this is my solution, just informed by my education credits that I have to maintain for a certification in LEED, which is the innovative green building design. So that's one thing. So a lot of the green infrastructure is focused on municipal property owners right now. And we residential property owners don't really have a whole lot of resources. But, if we kind of put together a public education program and a best design library, I did this myself just with a landscaper and materials from Home Depot and I did it for less than $7,000.
What about ideas for folks that might be in really low income areas or might be renting? Is there anything that they can do to help mitigate some of these effects?
Well, renters, I think you can definitely start talking to your building owner. So, if we just put a green roof, which green roof sounds like it requires some kind of permit and engineering design, but I'm not so sure it does. There really hasn't been any conversation about what constitutes progress on that. And I'm aware that like Lake View Roofing Supply on Western Avenue has trays of rooftop garden plants that are supposed to be drought tolerant. And so is it going to be helpful? I don't know the answer to this question, to just throw a couple of those trays up on your roof to help retain that water, to soak it up. The point is to slow down the water. So maybe that's something that renters could do, but they could also, I want to encourage everybody to use your voice. So, and I have some other ideas about what we can ask for local retailers to start carrying products that frankly used to be carried. I used to be able to find more environmentally friendly products, specifically at Target, that I think there just wasn't that much of a market for it. So they stopped carrying it, which is just sad to me, but yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I hear that you're also a proponent of reusing wastewater. How does that work exactly? And why does Illinois currently ban it?
Well, to address your first question, there's a number of ways that we can reuse water. So what people are most familiar with, and especially when you're talking about municipal governments trying to assess whether they can adapt it, everyone just thinks of third pipe, which is what is very famous in Florida and California. So they have a third pipe of gray water that they can use for irrigation that doesn't meet potable standards. I personally do not think this is going to work in Illinois or any older city, right? Because we've got older buildings, we don't have space for a third pipe. And we have some jurisdictional issues about who's going to lay that pipe. So I think the easiest implementation is to allow our industry to reuse their water. And this also takes advantage of the opportunity to decrease pollution discharge to our environment.
So Sharon, how might we help Chicagoans become more aware and appreciative of our various waterways?
Well, I think you're asking about citizen action, which I love. So two big things that we can be aware of is our phosphate products. Illinois is one of 12 states that have been sued for the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. And we're also one of 16 states that do not have reuse policy. So we have an interim goal to decrease our phosphorus reduction by 25% by 2025, which is coming up. So we used to have more phosphate-free soaps available at big box realtors like Target. So I'm challenging all youth, kids, to ask their parents to buy phosphate-free soap and also lawn fertilizer. And then also, this would be a great project for scouts, like somebody pursuing an Eagle Scout project or the Girl Scout Awards, the Golden Award, is to go to those realtors and promote carrying those products again, and then ask for them to do an end aisle. And then they could maybe like take pictures of that and document that for their award project. I'm also going to challenge everybody listening today to particularly read Dan Egan's Battle of the Great City and the Great Lakes, which is in the New York Times, but then to also watch Brave Blue World on Netflix. The message there is technology exists for us to adapt to climate change, but policy is needed, which requires politics. And then how lucky are we that we get to solve a problem this big, which I think is an uplifting message. And perhaps motivational instead of doom and gloom.
Yes, I love that. I think as a millennial who has struggled with, finding out that many of the things that we grew up with are actually damaging our planet, it can feel pretty discouraging and pretty depressing at times. And finding new ways to feel motivated to kind of stay in the game, to protect our beautiful planet for future generations. So important. And we can definitely we'll have the links to that article and that documentary that you mentioned in our show notes. So one other aspect of this is kind of this faith connection. So for you personally, Sharon, how does your faith connect with your passion for water and for the environment?
Well, I feel very called to my profession. Definitely my faith is what, led me to this profession. I believe that we all have purpose in the world, and it's our individual responsibility to look at our gifts and the needs of the world. And there is no greater gift than the world, right? So it is for us to protect it. So my personal mission is to leave the place better than I found it, that, I picked up from Girl Scouts as a kid. And then as a teenager, I considered a number of helping careers, including, minister, social worker, or psychologist, and also a vet. But I kind of concluded that I was too empathetic to be highly effective in those professions. Then I learned about environmental engineering in college, and I knew that this was a career for me. So it's been a cornerstone of public health since Dr. John Stowe removed the pump handle on the public well to stem the cholera epidemic in 1850s England. It's a high public health impact career based on prevention, and thus probably low profile, which is perfect for me. I learned that I like to solve problems by managing the environment, following kind of a Montessori kind of approach. And when I talk about the environment in this context of problem solving, I understand it to be institutional constructs that lead us to have societal failures in a variety of social justice issues. So, I feel very lucky to have found a profession where I feel called.
I love that. And I think you're right. Climate and our environment, working towards protecting those is very much a social justice issue and a faith issue. Caring for this glorious planet that we have and enabling, our neighbors to be able to protect it and love it and benefit from it is truly a beautiful thing. And I'm so encouraged to hear all the things that you're doing, and very excited for your campaign.
Well, thank you, Leah. I think you just said that beautifully, right? So we're all in this together. So, and it is our planet to protect, and we borrow it from the future generations. And that's taken from Native American culture that, it definitely speaks to my heart.
So for those that are listening and might be more interested in finding out a little bit more about you and your platform, where can they go to get that information?
So you can search Waller #4 Water on social media and also on the internet to find my website. There's a lot of information there. My campaign looks very much like public education. So, in regarding the Brave Blue World documentary, if you watch that and you listen to the end message, that is pretty much why I'm running. So technology exists, but we need policy, and what an opportunity we have to solve this big problem. So, and I look forward to talking to anybody that needs more information about water reuse and climate change adaptation. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take a village. And I think it starts with the kids learning about the water cycle in school.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on our beautiful Lake Michigan. I'm Leah Smith for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.